Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Dee Dee Laugesen, Executive Secretary for the Committee on the Present Danger China. We appreciate your interest in our weekly webinars in which we expose and analyze the Chinese Communist Party's unrestricted warfare against America and the help being provided to the CCP in waging that warfare by captured U.S. elites. We encourage you to visit presentdangerchina.org for information on new programs, access to videos of our past webinars, and tons of other very valuable content. Please subscribe to our Substack at Present Danger China and follow us on X at CPD China for updates. Our moderator today is Frank Gaffney. Frank is president of the Institute for the American Future and vice chair for the Committee on the Present Danger China. He is also host of Securing America on Real America's Voice Network.
Thank you, Dee Dee, and thank you to all of you in the audience, especially those of you who are subscribing to these programs. I believe that we've conducted something on the order of 200 of them to date. Each of them, I believe, is of importance as they particularly collectively tell a story about the nature of the Chinese Communist Party and the threat that it poses to not just the United States, but to the free world as it seeks to dominate the entire planet. We've been chronicling the various ways in which the CCP has pursued that goal. And one of the most comprehensive of those unrestricted warfare techniques is the subject of today's program. It is the Belt and Road Initiative, the sort of colonial build-out that the Chinese have undertaken literally across the globe. The last I saw, something on the order of 147 countries have become implicated in one fashion or another in it. We're going to talk specifically about a place that has been a prime focus of the Chinese efforts to, well, buy politicians, capture elites, as they call it, to agree to payday loans, whereby the interest charges are exorbitant and unsustainable. The Chinese, on the basis of them, engage in the construction of various kinds of infrastructure, almost always with Chinese nationals, not the local workforce. And they then have in place what are, by design, in almost every instance, dual use infrastructure. That is to say, capable of being used for civilian, yes, but also military purposes, and in particular designed to the specifications that enable them to be used by the Chinese People's Liberation Army or Navy or Air Force. And the cumulative effect of all of this has been to burden country after country after country with these debt trap financing arrangements, infrastructure that may or may not be terribly well constructed or durable, but almost always having with it a lot of strings, obviously the financial ones, but also in the form of perhaps the presence of Chinese military personnel and others that have the practical effect, more or less, of colonizing these nations. And in Africa, this is being done on a scale that's almost unimaginable. Virtually every country, if not, in fact, every country, has become a partner in the Belt and Road Initiative to one degree or another. We're going to look at what are the strategic implications of such arrangements. What is the Belt and Road Initiative in the first instance, but also what are the practical consequences of what the Chinese have been up to, not least for the countries in question. But also, are the wheels coming off the Belt and Road Initiative as a result of the various problems, especially the economic ones, in China itself? And if so, are there opportunities for the United States to make up for lost time on the continent of Africa, perhaps by relying on its private sector to help fill the void created by the Chinese, it appears, withering of attention? We will be talking about all of this with a very distinguished group. I'm very pleased to say some of them are familiar to this audience. They're individuals who've been partners in our Committee on the Present Danger China, or have simply contributed to the programs in the past. Others are new to the program, and we're very pleased to have them with us as well. We're going to start with the Honorable Dave Bratt, former member of Congress. He accomplished the extraordinary feat of defeating a House Majority Leader in a primary fight. He went on to serve 2 terms, I believe, in the United States House of Representatives. He is an economist by training, a PhD. He has been very active in public policy matters, both during his time in the Congress, of course, but also afterwards. He's the author of, among other books, American Underdog, Proof that Principles Matter. He is these days the Dean of the Business School and a Vice Provost of Liberty University. We're delighted to have him with us to sort of help level set about what is the BRI, as it's known, and is it failing in Africa? And if so, why? We have him via a video that he produced for the purpose of contributing to this program. We're delighted to go to the video with Dave Bratt now.
China, 10 years ago or so, was making massive inroads, right? That's back also when they were growing at 10%. And so now China's cracking up along a number of fronts, but of course it's very hard. Money is fungible, and a communist regime can just, patch holes one at a time until the whole thing collapses, kind of like with Russia and the fall of the wall. And so they're having problems. They got the ghost cities. They got the local public debt problem, and whether the nationals help them out, they got the real estate problem. They got a demographic problem. And they got capital flight, trying to leave. That's a big signal. And so with respect to Africa, the Belt and Road Initiative was quite powerful. They were invested in the billions in every single country you can name. But that kind of wore off and lost its luster after about 2 or 3 years. They are no longer in like even with China. They've been treated terribly. China kind of brings in their own workforce, so the Africans don't increase the human capital and get the wages in the country. And then the normal thing that the West has done to go in and doesn't allow African countries to do the value added. So they build up their own economies, and China has certainly done that. And then on top of that, you got the debt traps. And on top of that, you got cultural problems, right? Most of these countries are Christian, and they're very warm people, right? If we have friends from Ghana, just the warmest people on the earth, Christian faith and family and shared values that way. China makes a great deal, and that's kind of the biggest issue we have is Africa. Some of these countries are very poor, right? South Sudan right now is still making $500 a year per capita. That's not typical. That's not Ghana and Nigeria. But that's just an example. And so if China comes in and says, we have capital available, we're going to start building this, that, and the other thing, the African country basically says yes. But now some of these projects have run through fruition, and payments are due, and then interest accrues, and the Africans are starting to see what the game was. It's not what they promised. And so a lot of these have just fallen apart. All this to say that I think the whole China Belt and Road Initiative is also collapsing, right? They just do not have the capital in the tens and hundreds of billions to be thrown around in Africa for to enhance their empire. And I think part of it was they're buying votes on the United Nations with these billions. If they gave you nice, rich contract. They could count on some of the African votes for trade initiatives and other, not to get put on the nasty lists in the international circles. And so that's a lot of what's involved. Xi Jinping, you guys have all followed this, but he gave a key speech in front of the party over a year ago, and said roughly, three things. We're going to go full on Marxist-Leninist. Second, no more market reforms back like 30 years ago, where they opened up and used the market system a little bit. And then they've also dismissed, peace and harmony and China language. And they are basically using war footing language. That is some serious stuff right there. And I know you go back to unrestricted warfare with everybody all the time, that 1999 pamphlet that everybody ought to read. But Xi Jinping spelled it all out, and now they're pursuing that. It looks to me like they're going internal. And I don't know if they're just reading the logic that the West is fed up with the gains and they see it coming, or if it's more muscular than that, and they're getting ready for war, right, along Taiwan, and they want to be self-sufficient along their lines, right? It looks like they're going inward. They want to have a self-sufficient economy based on consumption in their country. I don't think they're going to pull that out, right? They've been doing external trade to pay the bills. The Africans want to be our friends. And so there are many ways to engage. It doesn't have to be through USAID and the State Department, our CIA. The whole world is onto us now. That was just grotesque. And now, President Trump's laying out a whole new philosophy with respect to ending these wars. And he's a business guy. He just wants to do business deals. And I've been around a ton of friends around the world that are doing big business deals, business to business, in Africa. And they have plenty to offer. And so, it's time for the U.S. to take the initiative and be what the U.S. Should always have been. We should have just been building friendships, right? This CIA nastiness, there's no need for it, right? We should be building friends along the lines of business and faith and the Christian bonds we have with some of these countries. And that'll serve us much better in the end. So, I applaud. I think President Trump is doing it the right way. The business-to-business piece avoids the politics. It avoids the bureaucracy. It avoids all the green, initiatives and all the quota systems in order to be tied into the administration and the left. They're sick of it, right? I worked at the World Bank 35 years ago, and we're sitting here making the poorest countries in the world sign off that they'll use 20% of any contract for green energy. It's just a sign off for the Democrat Party, roughly. And so none of that's worked. And so it's time to re-engage.
We're very appreciative of that contribution to the program. We're going to turn next to one of our faithful regulars, prime member of our Committee on the Present Danger, China, a retired colonel in the United States Marine Corps, who also has the distinction of having served our country as a Foreign Service Officer in Embassy Tokyo. He has lived and worked for many years, decades, I guess now, in Asia, East Asia specifically, and has been engaged in a variety of entrepreneurial and other business activities there. But he's really knowledgeable about what China has in mind, not only in that region, but literally around the world, including in Africa. His name is Colonel Grant Newsom, United States Marine Corps, retired, as I said. He's the author of a very timely and important book entitled When China Attacks, A Warning to America. We're proud to have him with us and ask him to provide some commentary now about the military implications of China's play for dominance in Asia, in Africa as well as elsewhere, but specifically for the purpose of the present webinar, what they're up to in Africa and whether it is in fact foundering. Colonel, it's great to have you back, sir. Welcome.
Glad to be here, Frank. Well, China and Africa, they want it just like they do Latin America, just like they want the Middle East, like they want Europe. It's all in play from the Chinese perspective. And when you look at it from a military perspective, something to keep in mind is that China wants a global military, one that can operate anywhere on Earth, just like the United States can. And to do that, a military has got to have this network of infrastructure, of ports, airfields, and to which it has access, just like the United States can. And the Chinese have set about creating a military, one that can defeat the United States, but also has the ability to operate in any part of the globe. And they have gone about setting up that infrastructure, the network of ports and airfields that they need. And Africa has been, like target one of about 6 other places that are all target one for the Chinese. And they've got the scale, the resources to be able to put their markers down just about everywhere on the board and at the same time. And just speaking about, say, port facilities, if you go down to the east coast of Africa to Tanzania, Dar es Salaam, down to Kenya, Mombasa, further down to Mozambique, Beira, down into South Africa, Richards Bay, all the way Durban, all the way down to the coast at Simon's Town, and you're at the tip of Africa. In all of these places, China has a presence. It has they've either built or restored or refurbished ports or have operating rights. And then you go up the east coast through Angola to Lobito, farther up, just go up to Guinea, Equatorial Guinea, around the coast, around the Horn of that left side of Africa. There's Chinese ports everywhere. And they have got, the figure is something like they have got involved in one way or another in about 100 ports over the last 20 years. And these, by definition, a port is dual use, which means that a Navy can use it just as well as a commercial ship can. And a military has to have ports. It's often not realized that it's very helpful. In fact, it's essential to have a facility that you can go into, get refurbished, get resupplied, let your crew get off and get some rest, fix up the ships as you need them, and then go back to work. It's not like you can just sail away from China or from the United States and just stay out there for 6 months. You've got to have places that you can go in, and that is what China is setting up. And they have been immensely successful at it. To date, however, they have only got one military base, and that's in a place called Djibouti, this tiny little place around the Arabian Sea. You have to look on a map to find it. But it's an interesting story there because it reflects the pattern of how the Chinese go about their business in Africa from a military perspective. And in Djibouti, it started in the 2000s with a commercial presence. And the idea was, well, we're just going to do business. And every now and then a Chinese ship will stop off. And then gradually they expanded their presence, expanded their facilities, and then Chinese military ships started to show up. Just once again, just to get some rest, nothing to worry about is what everyone was told. And then this continued and continued. The Chinese showed up more and more often. And gradually in 2017, they announced, well, we got a base here. And you had about a regiment or a big battalion of Chinese Marines stationed there. You had ships permanently stationed there. You have facilities that can handle the biggest ships you've got. The Chinese were at this point very brazen, just saying, yeah, we've got it here to take care of our interests in the region. And this is after they had denied it continuously, saying we're not going to have a base here. Forget about it. You're just insulting us. Well, they've got a base in Djibouti. And to say this is a pattern that will repeat itself. They don't have a base anywhere else yet, but that's coming. There's talks that they've been inquiring about getting bases in, most recently in Equatorial Guinea on the west coast. And also they've been obviously scoping out Lobito in Angola, Walvis Bay in southwest Namibia. But they haven't got it yet, but they're looking, and it'll come. And it'll be in that sequence that I started, commercial, to get you political influence, you bribe a lot of people, and then eventually your military, your security gradually gets a position. And part of the Djibouti story is that when they first showed up in Djibouti, that the U.S. Marines had just set up a camp in Djibouti, and the commander there was hearing from the French, from the locals, what the Chinese had in store for this. And he reported this to the State Department and the embassy, and he was told to shut up and stay in his lane because the Chinese had no interest in Djibouti or that area. Well, that, hopefully we've wised up by now. I'm not sure that we have. But the Chinese do have this infrastructure that they're setting up. And the intention is to eventually have the positioning so that they can lock up the South China Sea, the South Atlantic, because they had some pretty good prospects for that when Argentina was leftist. But now that Milei has taken over in Argentina, that's problematic. But Brazil is a possibility. And the Chinese Navy, along with the Russian Navy and the South African Navy, have done exercises operating out of Cape Town, out of Simonstown, into the South Atlantic. And that's the idea, is to be able to operate from the South America over to Africa, and then from the African East Coast to the west coast of the east coast of the Indian Ocean. So you can see how it works, and it's establishing a network, a web of bases, facilities that allow China to operate globally. It has a while to go, but I don't think it's stopping at all. They're continuing with their efforts, just full speed ahead, regardless of their domestic economic problems that they've got. You'll notice that these are all along the major trade routes as well. And that's part of the deal, is that you want to be able to, one, defend your overseas interests, which is what the Chinese have always talked about. But also, when you are the big dog, when you have forces that are able to shut off international trade, it gives you immense political influence, not just locally, but globally. And also, it's worth noting that in terms of the U.S. response here, that apparently we've been offered access and even to set up ports in a few places, set up bases. And for some reason, we have a hard time jumping on these opportunities as they come along. Maybe this administration will be, but the Defense Department and the U.S. government seem to just move at sort of glacial speed at best. But there's a huge political aspect to a base, because it shows that the country that has offered this has put their trust in the United States. They've bet on the United States. And if you do that, you take advantage of that offer. It creates a real strong political tie. But the other thing I would note is that if you just look at this from a military perspective, you may find that if you don't consider the economic aspects of it, that you may find that you may have a base, but if there's someone else is going to outplay you on the economic front, and you may find that you are asked to leave. So what I've tried to do is to lay out why this is key terrain. If you're looking for why Africa is so important, if you're setting up the infrastructure to be able to militarily dominate the globe, and Africa is really in China's crosshairs. I don't think I'm certainly not as pessimistic about how well they're doing as the previous speaker was, but it is a place that's getting its due now. And hopefully the United States will pay full attention to this. I am an Asia guy, but I will note I actually used to live in South Africa a long time ago. So I have a little bit of familiarity with the region. So, well, thanks for having me, Frank.
Colonel Newsom, thank you. And I detected that you had a familiarity with the continent that was belied by what we're most aware of, namely your deep knowledge of East Asia. Colonel, if I could ask the indulgence of our two colleagues, I know you have to jump off, but if I could just put a question to you before you go.
Sure.
You have time for one?
Sure.
It's actually sort of a two-part question. One is, you have, I think, said you're sufficiently persuaded that the Chinese commitment to these overseas bases and the operations that they will enable them to have worldwide is such that whatever their difficulties at the moment, economically, financially, what have you, politically even, this effort to dominate the continent of Africa is likely to continue. Point one. Point two, if you could just speak to evidence that the Trump administration 2.0 seems rather more likely to withdraw from bases than to be creating new ones. How would you make book on that?
Well, I've heard that, and that there are people in the new administration apparently who do think we should retrench. that being forward deployed is a problem. It's something we can't sustain, and we should thus pull out. That, of course, is going to make some of our friends who thought they could count of us pretty darn uncomfortable when they're faced with Chinese aggression, and not just military, but this economic juggernaut. And if the idea is that we're going to pull back, and if something happens, we'll then sally out from the United States and deal with the problem, well, that's not going to work very well. It's politically difficult to move, but just operationally, it's extremely hard to operate. And I would suggest, remember when we pulled out of Afghanistan, and the idea was, well, we'll operate over the horizon. Well, how well has that worked? So there is this belief that we don't have to be overseas. But I think that is mistaken, and I hope that belief doesn't get the upper hand. But we have opportunities, and just for in the Pacific, for example, that there's at least 4 or 5 places that have offered us basing rights over the last decade that I know of. In each case, we have squandered them. We just haven't been interested. Can't move fast enough. Well, we'd better start doing that, because the Chinese move faster than you can imagine. As I said, I've heard that we've been offered some things in Africa, and it'd be better if we didn't admire the issue, instead go right ahead with it. We've got friends there who've, stuck their necks out for us, and it'd be good if we actually gave them some reason to feel like they made the right decision there.
Great. And sir, just on the question of the Chinese, is there imperative such that the momentary, perhaps, or even more enduring financial setbacks such that they will press on, that what we've described as possibly a vacuum being created that we might fill, not actually arriving?
I'm afraid so. That's how it looks to me. And you look at it over the last 20 plus years, that regardless of economic difficulties the Chinese have had, they have always properly and adequately funded the military. That has always got all the money it needs. The foreign exchange that they have, enough of it goes to the military. That's the objective. And they'll put up with a lot of discomfort, but it's the military that always gets the funding. And Belt and Road is part of that. And as long as we keep pouring in convertible currency, dollars, well, they're going to be able to pay for it. Choke that off, and then they might have some trouble. But as it is, regardless of their economic problems, the military security end of things gets all the cash it needs.
You've touched on one of my favorite issues of our financing the enemy, and we will come back to that in your absence, sir. But thank you for tabling it, and we will be very much looking forward to our next visit with you. Colonel Grant Newsom, United States Marine Corps retired. Thank you, sir. We're going to turn next to a distinguished first-time participant in these programs. Captain Jay Bolton has introduced us to Dr. Abdillahi Hashi Habib, who is a parliamentarian in his native Somalia. He serves on the House of the People's Foreign Affairs Committee in Somalia, and has been actively involved in a number of programs of, among other things, USAID, as it happens. We might talk with him a little bit about that. But he's been very focused on the topic we've asked him to address, based in part, I think, on his experience here in the United States, as well as, of course, his vantage points in Somalia, namely countering the Chinese Communist Party's Belt and Road Initiative in Somalia and East Africa more broadly. And the subtitle of his talk is An Opportunity for Strategic Investment and Enhanced U.S. Influence in the Horn of Africa. Dr. Habib, we're very pleased to have you with us, sir. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Frank, for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to share with you and with your audience about the possibility that exists in Somalia and how we can create a bond between Somalia and the United States. I am a member, I've been elected 2022 to be a member of the Parliament, of the House of Representatives, and as a member of the Foreign Committee. I'm also an American citizen. I'm a proud American citizen, and I live in Washington, D.C. area. And I came here to really promote commitment as an American citizen and I'm a Somalian citizen that can benefit both Somalia and the United States. And the idea I'm bringing is very unique. It has no cost, no risk, and it's an opportunity to counter the Communist Party platform of what they call Belt Road Initiative, which is really an initiative of giving huge loans for infrastructures for African countries who can afford it, and it becomes a liability later on, and that puts a situation with that country to compromise their sovereignty and their decision-making process. And to encounter that, especially Horn of Africa, which is Somalia, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Eritrea, South Sudan, and also Uganda and Kenya, is an opportunity that will stabilize. And that's what I would like to share with you. And I hope my presentation will help you to better understand the danger of China present and key issues that exist in Somalia and how we can bring USA government and private sector to take opportunity in Somalia. And after I finish my presentation, I would like to welcome your questions and solicit your recommendations. And I will start my presentation. First of all, as you know, Somalia is located in Horn of Africa and is geographically very, very suitable for geopolitical and geoeconomics in the whole world. And all the trade go into Atlantic Ocean and also go into the other side of Indian Ocean. Somalia is affected by it. Somalia, God give them what they call a very huge natural resources. And we're talking about more than $30 billion barrels of oil and gas. And we have a 25% of the world uranium supply, which today, with IT technology moving ahead, and especially artificial intelligence, needs more energy. And this will be a place where they can take advantage of it. And we also have a huge deposit of rare elements, which China uses it as a weapon, weaponize it, and using to blackmail, as what they did in Japan 2011. Because what they have is that they buy from raw material from the African countries, and they have a technology which they refine the rare earth elements from raw to refine, and they control 90% of the world rare earth elements. And this is available in Somalia. And we also have the largest coast in the whole continent of Africa, which is 3,200 kilometers, which very huge variety of seafood, like a tuna, lobster, and other type of seafood. And if you look at the Suez Canal, if you look at the map of Somalia, it really encounters that's where the whole supply ships go through. And that strategic place is very, very important for United States and to take advantage of it. And the issue that today exists in Yemen, and the Yemeni people know more about Somalis and they don't mess around with it. It will be an opportunity having using that strategic place. Today, the Chinese government has really did a lot of investment in Somalia. And their goal is to use the Somali natural resources for their own benefit, as they did in many African countries. If you look at Djibouti, today they owe $1.4 billion. Ethiopia owns $7.4 billion. If you look at Kenya, they owe $7.4 billion. Same thing with Uganda, you're talking about Eritrea and other countries. And that infrastructure buildings that they're doing it is an advantage for them, because when you have a huge debt, which is more than your GDP and takes a huge amount of your GDP, it is very difficult for that country to resist Chinese interests. And in Somalia today, almost more than $1 billion import from Chinese products, and we have no export to China. So it is a very huge situation that we are facing. And every product that we use today construction material we are building, houses, the food we eat, the medicine we use, everything comes all from China. And that is a way of doing the business. And then when you have a corrupted government in the office, it's a temptation to have influence. When the United States gives you money, they ask you how do you spend the money. But when you have a Chinese government giving you money, they don't care what you do with the money. And if you are a corrupted leader, you're tempted to do things like that with China and sell out your country for penny. I'm bringing an opportunity to the United States, and that opportunity is a very, very lucrative business and influential for the United States. By creating, right now, United States spends more than $2 billion in Somalia, and none of that money ever shows up in the Somali citizens, which was really assigned to benefit. So what I'm suggesting is that a State Department will create, under the Assistant Secretary of State and for Africa Bureau, a program called a Somali Development Program. And you will have administrator. And the funds that the United States has been spending in Somalia, and which most of them are welfare system, which makes the Somali people who are market-oriented, free market-oriented, and who have really have like to work hard and earn their money, becomes dependent. And we have been living in this situation for 30 years and nothing has changed. And so if you look any part of Somalia today, you will find no development program. And the United States spent more than $50 billion since last 30 years. If we can change that amount of money into a development money, where Somalia development program can channel that money into developing Somali infrastructure, this will give America more influence in Horn of Africa, because you make Somalia stable, and this will deter the Somalian government to really have interest in Chinese and this China road initiative. What will the SDP do for the United States? It will enhance regional security, military capacity, and economic development. It promotes economic development programs. It attracts international investment for Somalia. And it will also give security territory for Somali water. Right now, the 3,200 kilometer water that Somalia has been stolen by either European Union big ships or the Chinese. Right now, 30 big Chinese ships are taking our sea. And what do the revenue we get back from them? Zero. Where did that money go? It goes to the corrupted leadership, and it's the peanuts compared to what the Chinese are taking. And by having this program and being directed every money invested by United States, and through this program, this will really enhance the security of Somalia and the military. That will help defeat the ISS and Al-Shabaab. And this will really touch the lives of the Somali people in Somalia, which have never seen a single dime where America spends so much money. And that will also bring Somalia and United States closer. How will the program work? By having this program, which channels money directly to the investment, to the people in Somalia, rebuilding infrastructure. This will really counter the Chinese money coming to Somalia, which they have been abusing with many countries like Djibouti and Ethiopia and Kenya. It will enhance also regional security and stability. If Somalia is becoming stable, that stability, it will trickle down to Djibouti, to Sudan, to Djibouti, to Eritrea, to Kenya and Ethiopia. Right now, Ethiopia is fragile. There is a turmoil within Ethiopia, and they are fighting against each other. Because if Somalia is stable and economically viable, infrastructure being built in Somalia, that will give Ethiopia access to the Somali seaports, and 200 million people in Ethiopia will have access, and their economic growth will increase. And the more economic growth happens, is the stability comes in. The same thing with Djibouti, same thing with Uganda, same thing with South Sudan, and also Kenya. All of them will benefit this situation. Now, there is then secure natural resource for U.S. interest. this program will help to secure America for oil and gas that plenty exists in Somalia. Uranium exists in Somalia. There's a copper, lithium, rare earth elements, and also seafood will be access to the USA business. And this will make Somalia and United States a partnership for a long and strong partnership. And this partnership will really deter the Chinese influence in Horn of Africa. The question I want to raise to you is that, what about the consequence of inaction? Let's assume that nobody and the United States don't take this idea. What will happen? China, Russia, and other enemies will win, and USA will lose. Why will USA lose? Because USA will lose the influence to have in the Horn of Africa. Today, they have an opportunity to have that influence, because when you develop the infrastructure, the economy, and the system that exists in Somalia, that really have a lot. You know what China is doing? China, if United States don't take this opportunity, what happens is that China will take over Somalia, which means that America sells democracy while Chinese give money. And that's the reality that exists in Africa. What happens is that Al-Shabaab and ISIS terrorists will have a lot of influence in Somalia and the region, and that will also affect the global terrorism. And then what happens? United States will lose the only leadership they have right now in Africa. People look up to them, United States. They see as a leader of the free world. But if we don't do something in Horn of Africa, and then the enemy, whether China, Russia, or others like Iran, take advantage of Somalia and Horn of Africa, that will have a negative effect in the power that the United States always have. And you know what happens in Ethiopia? 2 million people in Ethiopia will have a civil war. And that civil war will force a lot of refugees to move out of Ethiopia and move to Europe, United States, and Canada. And that will have also a negative effect on the policy, America First, that Trump is trying to introduce in the United States, where a lot of refugees will be coming to the United States. What does it cost the United States, this idea? The net, it has no cost to the United States. How does that work? The United States already spending a lot of money in Somalia. That money, the way I see it, is a welfare. The Trump administration have froze all the foreign aid, whether diplomat or humanitarian, for the world, but also particularly for Somalia. That money never showed up in the houses of the Somali people who tend to benefit on this. So using that money to develop Somalia does not cost the United States money, because it's already money allocated and was going to the pocket of the international agency money pockets, or going to the elite politicians in Somalia who are corrupted. Then what happens? The natural resources that Somalia has will get a profit sharing and license fees. Somali government, through the parliament, not through the executive order, but to the parliament, which I'm a member of it, and I have a privilege to introduce a Somalia-US Act for partnership that will give a free operational permit under BOT terms for the United States. So it really will not cost. Somalia will provide at Sela location, which faces the Suez Canal, at Hafun, at Hobyo, and also Kismayo, USA military base. I will draft a motion or act that will invite United States to have access to these ports and any other ports that intend to place. So that way, they don't have to worry about it. Any political leader coming next year or 4 years from now, because the act passes the parliament, will be the law of the country. And this will give America an access that they never had before. And what they are countering right now in Djibouti, which the Chinese are now building, the military base is also carriers will be coming in. and Djibouti owes $1.4 billion to Chinese, and they have influence. And very soon, what they did in Sri Lanka, they will take over Djibouti port, which means that USA has to go through Chinese own port. And it's what Trump has been fighting in Panama and saying that I don't want the Chinese company managing the port of the Panama Canal. This is the same thing will happen in Djibouti because Djibouti cannot pay 70% of their money. GDP goes to payment of Chinese, and I've been told that the Djibouti government's extension. The idea that Somali development program will come with the State Department. The State Department will appoint administrator under the Assistant Secretary for African Payroll. That will have advisors and USA contractors, and then will directly do business with Somalia and will have a transparency and accountability where every dollar is counted. This will be the best way to handle it instead of going to USAID or other international NGOs which are not accountable and not doing anything. So this will directly go to the Somali people, and the welfare system that have been existing will be removed and will be moved back to investment and self-reliance type of program.
This has been a very interesting and quite comprehensive presentation. Captain Jay Bolton is, again, no stranger to these programs, a veteran and now retired alumnus of the U.S. Merchant Marine. He is these days a maritime consultant, a tanker and tall ships master, and one of the founders of the United States Maritime Foundation. He is a big thinker when it comes to maritime issues, particularly those that relate to the urgent need for the United States to essentially reconstitute its shipbuilding capacity as well as its understanding of its role as a maritime power. And we're always very grateful to him for his participation in these programs. Captain Bolton is going to take what we've just heard and the previous comments for that matter to the next step in terms of both the implications of all this for the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative and specifically what should the United States do about it under present circumstances. Captain Bolton, thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is now yours, sir.
Thank you very much. I appreciate. Regarding Dr. Habib's presentation, let me just start off with, wow, what an opportunity for America's government and the private sector. This is a chance to stick it to the Chinese and use this example for Somalia, for all of Africa, following the model that he has outlined. So I am very enthusiastic about the opportunity, assuming we can get this to the appropriate decision makers in the Trump administration, who are the deal makers, the business makers. We don't need Congress. This can be a public-private sector partnership. So with a public-private sector partnership, under the terms that Dr. Abiy suggested, the United States would basically have complete control of critical assets with deeds and agreements to engage in counter trade, to pay for the more than $2 or $3 billion worth of infrastructure development, whatever that may be, at no net cost to the taxpayer. And importantly, that money that would be consumed through counter trade or achieved through counter trade would go directly into the pockets of American companies that would do the infrastructure projects. So I think it's a phenomenal opportunity for us to lead by example without having to mess around with the narcissistic silos of bureaucracy of the government. One element that was mentioned about the Navy being reluctant to have a Navy base, maybe it's like the Field of Dreams, but in the infrastructure development project that Dr. Habib has outlined, is building multiple Coast Guard ports and small bases for the Coast Guard that would logically then be used by military assets as would need to be. So I'm very enthusiastic about the opportunity If everybody is successful and thinks proactively, I suggest that Somalia could become the Singapore of East Africa. And for that reason, I like to call it Somalipore. It has the opportunity, and we can move very quickly, assuming we can get some buy-in from the Trump administration. So that's the essence of my take from all of this. I want to leave you with just a couple of slides that I did without much that punctuates what everybody has been saying this morning, how China has been screwing Africa for the last several years. And just take a quick look at some of these slides. Just skim through each one, about 10 seconds each one. It'll show you exactly what Grant and Dave Brett have been talking about. They're all over the place. This is all of the port network that Grant was talking about. And it just shows, look at all the African countries that are in debt to China. How did that happen? So by starting with Somalia, we can start to reverse that process, show the business model, the public-private sector model that we would do in Somalia for these other African countries. We will provide the leadership so that they can follow. Same thing. Look at that. Look at all that debt going to the Chinese. This talks to Grant Newsom's issues about the military bases all over the world. So to put that picture in your mind and think of how do we counter that? How do we have some presence as from a military perspective while we're building the commerce and trade infrastructure? So that's about all I have. I'm very enthusiastic. I'm hoping that we can find the companies and firms that want to engage in infrastructure development in partnership with the U.S. government. We can move within a matter of months once we put these deals in place. Over.
Thank you, Captain. This has been a very stimulating conversation. We often have an obligation, I guess, opportunity certainly, to describe problems that arise as a result of what the Chinese Communist Party is doing, often in the way of unrestricted warfare against us. This is a conversation about what we can do to counter such activities, particularly in Africa. But as the captain just said, perhaps with a view to a model of these partnerships being something that could enable the United States to be present in, engaged with, and hopefully mutually advantageously advancing our interests and those of the host countries far beyond Africa. So I want to thank Dr. Habib and all of our presenters for their comments on these topics, particularly on the need for us to have this kind of counter action against China. Let me start, if I may, with you, Dr. Habib. We've had some history with Somalia. Of course, I just, as it happens, caught a documentary film that has been, I think, put together by Netflix, if I'm not mistaken, about the survivors of the whole Black Hawk Down crisis. And it calls to mind a time in Somalia where the United States was not very welcome. There were indeed lots of people very angry with us and vice versa, of course. Could you speak, sir, to the present reasons that you believe that the hospitality or the openness to a relationship with the United States would be very different today and you know, in a way that is likely to endure?
Thank you very much. One accident that happened in 1993 with the Black Hawk Down really doesn't represent the true story, how Somali feel about the United States. And I'm not exaggerating. We were in a communist. In my high school, a lot of people would not believe that, but I had a North Korean teacher teaching me in my high school, grade 9 all the way grade 12. I had East Germany teachers teaching me. And everybody believed that's communism. So we were there. Reagan came in, changed everything for Somalia. That's when Somalia, which is free market oriented people who believe in freedom, fell in love with Reagan, and Reagan changed Somalia. And I'm a byproduct of that group. My older brother is the same. So the feeling that exists in 1980s exists today. And I have no doubt in my mind today, Somalis always look when they have issue to the United States. They would look at the Twitter coming from State Department. What did the United States said? They don't care about any other country in the world. What they said, what matters is what the United States said. Trump today has more influence in Somalia than any other president who ever came to the United States. Everybody's calling me and asking me what Trump is thinking about us, what Trump is going to do for us. Well, that tells you how much they care. And I'm telling you, Trump has a great opportunity to make the difference today. There is an opportunity for Somalia will open hands, will welcome the United States to have a military base in every location they intend to do. And there will be no charges because the Somali people will benefit American presence. And that presence will stabilize not only Somalia, it will also stabilize Djibouti, it will stabilize Djibouti, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Kenya, and Uganda, and South Sudan. Believe me, the Black Hawk Down is a blip in the air. It does not reflect how Somalis feel about the United States. And that's the truth. And with me as a foreign member of the Foreign Committee, I can bring legislation to the parliament inviting the United States to do business in Somalia, whether militarily, building bases, or doing natural resources that are available in Somalia, which is the right. American company owned that right in 1980s, and therefore they are entitled to get their drilling process blocks they own back. And I, as a member of the parliament, I can assure you 90% of the members of parliament will vote for any program that I bring into Somalia. And that's how they feel it, because America stood up with us for 35 years when we were in civil war, the only country in the world that have been provided. But the perception about the Black Hawk Down or the civil war within our tribal things is affecting the American foreign policy. We are in debt to the United States and the United States people.
Dr. J. Bolton, we've had contradictory assessments from Dave Bratt and Colonel Grant Newsom as to whether the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative is actually on the skids, or whether the priority that the Chinese assign to all of their military activities, of which, as I think you have heard both of them present, clearly Belt and Road is a part. What's your assessment, sir, of the viability of Belt and Road at the moment? And are we right in hearing from Dr. Habib that there is an opportunity here to fill a vacuum?
I suggest there's a huge vacuum because all of my dealings in Africa, West Coast, and mostly Somalia, the local, they know how badly the Chinese are screwing them when they bring in Chinese laborers and do what they want to do for their own objectives. So they're looking for the life jacket, and they've been looking to America for a long time. And so they're business centric too. I can't tell you how many educated, fine Somali Americans that I know, very business centric. They want to do business. So I think we can outcompete the Chinese on the business level, where they would welcome a better alternative and a better deal. And that's why we're providing an honest package. They're providing a corrupt package.
The Chinese companies are going to the north of Somalia. And their spices, they are from Hong Kong, not from China mainland. I found out they were trying to mine lithium and rare earth elements, the area that I represent in the parliament. I wrote a letter to the Chinese ambassador in Mogadishu, and I told him, Jay will share with you. I told them they have 48 hours to take their equipment out of that land. And they did it. The Chinese company took it out. And they're now complaining to the Speaker of the House, why am I complaining and why am I putting their name on a bad list in Somalia? The community reached out to me. That's how much people discussed about the abuse of the Chinese companies exploiting our natural resources and not even hiring one single person. They bring in their own, and they take in like the whole mining, they take paying $200, $300. That's the pure exploitation. And I stood up a month ago. I just want to share with you that.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I gather that one of the other irritants, shall we say, in the Chinese relationship, in addition to those that you've mentioned and Dave Bratt did, Doctor, is something that is rather shocking. Racism. The Chinese are arguably among the most racist people on the planet, and particularly, I gather, towards Black Africans. Is that in fact a correct assessment, and is that a factor in the opportunities here?
That's correct. They say we are lazy, we are not hardworking people. I just give you an example in Ethiopia. They built a big factory. They were trying to justify to bring Chinese to work in the factory when Ethiopia said no. And they say that you're not meeting the quota. You're lazy. And they forced Ethiopia to allow the Chinese to do to bring their own people. Any road they built, it is Chinese who built it. They don't allow the locals and the nationals to do. So this is a pure exploitation. But the problem is that we have today an opportunity for United States under Trump to really do something for Somalia, what Reagan did for Somalia. That changed Horn of Africa when Reagan made that decision. He said, I stand with Somalia when we come out of the communists. Today, we need Trump to stand with us and say, no more China, and come to the United States. And I guarantee they will get bases and they will get natural resources everywhere in Somalia, because the Somali people will benefit. Everybody is exploiting us. The Europeans are exploiting us. Turkey is exploiting us because we are vacuum, because the United States is not paying attention to us. It's time the United States to start with the Somalis, like what Reagan did.
Well, this is one of the reasons for this program, frankly, is to try to ensure that it is not for want of attention that policy is missing perhaps a very significant opportunity. Captain, let me just ask you, you've plied the waters off of the coast of Somalia in the past, I know, in your merchant marine career. Could you say a word about the threat of Somali pirates these days? One of the reasons why the Chinese got into Djibouti in the first place, as I recall, is we welcomed in their involvement as a counter-piracy partner. Where does that stand at the moment? And could you also speak to the question of Turkey's increasing interest in injecting itself into these areas, and whether that's likely to prove helpful in light of the difficulties that we have with the Sharia supremacist regime of Turkey?
Let me start with the last question first. You know better than anybody what Turkey's involvement is, and they've already taken over the port of Mogadishu. They have the same intent, the malintent, to defeat the United States. So they're not a friend, they're not an ally. Why they're part of NATO is beyond my comprehension. So going back to the opportunity and why we have this issue to begin with. Actually, back in 2011, I first became introduced to the piracy issues, then about a $10 billion a year cost. And it was from my work over there, I learned that the only reason for the piracy was because the foreign fishing vessels had chased the Somalis off the sea. And then some of them became pirates, and then the industry grew. All they need is to have the rule of law so their fishermen can go out and capture that 200,000 tons a year of fish. They're looking for that way to make a living. And that's been our quest for the last 12 years now, is to develop that infrastructure to enforce the rule of law. So during this interim period, everybody, all the Navy guys are making money or making pay raises by patrolling these water chasing pirates. Chinese are patrolling, totally unnecessary. If we had a national Coast Guard with the collaboration of the United States government in the training and process like that, and that's what we've been trying to for 12 years.
Back to you, Dr. Habib, and I guess probably final question. Could you speak to that issue of the piracy, as well as the question of whether what the Turks are interested in doing, and they're not alone, as you know, promoting this, well, I call it Sharia supremacism, this militant Islamic effort to dominate the world by, essentially waging jihad against everybody else. Where is Somalia now in terms of that as a source of potential problems with, among other countries, ours?
Let me come to the first, the piracy. A month ago, the Somali piracy, when they couldn't, was a Somali fisherman, when they couldn't take the Chinese 30 big vessels stealing their fish, and the Somali government's looking the other way around, they kidnapped one of them, and it was in the news. Finally, they paid $8 million and they let go. But this is what is going on. China is using its power of carrot and stick to the Somalian government to look other way around. And it has been going on. And the base they came to, Djibouti, is a gimmick. They're protecting their own stealing fishes from the piracy. They're not coming to protect the Somalian coast. Same thing with the Europeans. Europeans are watching on us stealing. So let's come to the Turkey. Turkey did something right in 2011, and they milking that opportunity, what they did 2011. They taken everything from us. Now, have you ever seen a government or cabinet ministers sign and approve agreement that they never seen it? And the parliament voted for agreement, you didn't even see it. And nobody knows what is in there, but they are taking our natural resources for protecting Somalia from Ethiopia. And they own the port. We don't know how much money the port generates. We don't know how much the airport generates. And the hotel, they have it. And they take in hard currency every day out of Mogadishu. And they open their own bank. So yes, they are actually the ruling party in Somalia right now. And their party, AKP, have an agreement. And this call it Islamic politics. And Islamic politics has no place in Somalia. Somalia is a country which is Muslim and 100% Muslim, and they will always be that way. But we have a democracy and freedom of speech, which is different than AK dictatorship, in which they're trying to impose in Somalia, and they want to keep the current leader to be in power for another 10 years, like the way in Argadan is doing. So, but where is the United States? This is why United States absence in Somalia is affecting, and every other and people who exploit in Somalia is taking advantage. So it's a time administration to come up with an end to this nonsense going on in Somalia once and for all, as Reagan did.
Thank you, Dr. Habib and Jay Bolton, as well as, of course, Colonel Grant Newsom, and the opening comments by Dave Bratt for giving us a very interesting insight into the aspects of the Chinese imperial ambitions through the Belt and Road Initiative, as they relate particularly, of course, to this part of Africa and then the continent more generally, but also worldwide. I just want to just underscore a point that both Dr. Habib and Jay Bolton made, that we're witnessing the Chinese not only behaving quite aggressively with this Belt and Road program, but what they're doing to the world's oceans and the fishing communities that rely on those oceans for their survival all over the planet is nothing less than predatory, to the extent of being completely destructive. As I understand it, we're witnessing the vacuuming, essentially, of the oceans, and there will be nothing left if they are not checked. And one of the ways perhaps this can be done is by the kind of collaboration that Dr. Habib has laid out. I want to thank you for the presentation, especially, Doctor, you've provided a path, if not a panacea, certainly a prospective solution to a yawning problem, and maybe, as Jay Bolton has indicated, a model that can apply elsewhere around the world as we contend with a Chinese threat that is great and on the march, I fear. And I did want to close just by tying this all back into something that Colonel Newsom mentioned in his parting answer. In part, the Chinese ability to do the Belt and Road Initiative, the Chinese capabilities to project power through the infrastructure that they're building and all the rest of it, is made possible by the underwriting of the United States. Specifically, the money that is being sent by Wall Street from our pension funds, from our mutual funds, 401k plans, exchange-traded funds, and other investment vehicles, some of it literally going into companies directly tied to the People's Liberation Army, others just into the CCP, which gets it to the same place ultimately as well. But to the extent that the Chinese are determined to continue to build out the Belt and Road Initiative as a military project, as an enabling of their power projection capabilities, it behooves us to stop enabling that by, among other things, our underwriting of the enemy. I commend you all, as I have before, terrific 2-season program that Maria Bartiromo of Fox Nation, Fox Business, has done. A second season just recently released on this theme. It's called Underwriting the Enemy. And the good news is that in this second edition, she interviewed, I think, as many as 10 different members of the United States House of Representatives, both Democrats and Republicans, members, I think all of them, of the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party in the House of Representatives. And there was unanimity that we must end this kind of crazy subsidizing of the threat we face, and as does every nation in Africa and many beyond. So with that closing thought, that another part of the solution here, engagement, yes, but also disengaging from China, is essential to the future of the free world. With that, let me say thank you to everybody again, especially our audience, for participating. I hope you will help us disseminate this video. And I want to say, God bless this country, and let us pray for the peace of Africa as well. Back to you, Didi. God bless you too.
Thank you, Frank. I couldn't agree more with your closing comments, and thank you for this incredible webinar. We appreciate all of you being here. A video of this webinar will be posted to presentdangerchina.org within a day of the conclusion of our program. Please share this and our other programs with your elected representatives, colleagues, and other networks, and subscribe to our Substack at Present Danger China. Follow us on X at CPD China for updates. Join us again next week for another installment of our Committee on the Present Danger China webinar series on the CCP's unrestricted warfare against America and the free world, and how CCP captured elites betray the USA. Thanks for being here today. Goodbye.